The music was pulsing through the air, the bass so heavy it seemed to shake the very floor beneath us. Laughter, shouts, and clinking glasses filled the space as people mingled, danced, and celebrated like there was no tomorrow. We were at the anniversary party of our close friends, Tom and Sarah, a grand event they had meticulously planned for months. My wife, Emily, looked absolutely radiant that evening. Her laughter flowed easily, her smiles warm and genuine. It had been a long time since I had seen her this happy, this carefree. I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride whenever I saw her from across the room. She was always the life of the party, effortlessly engaging with everyone around her. As the hours ticked by, I found myself pulled into conversations with old friends, and before I knew it, I was immersed in a blur of whiskey shots and half-forgotten jokes. I remember raising my glass over and over, losing track of how many drinks I had. It was a kind of reckless abandon I hadn't indulged in for a long time. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of Emily, always surrounded by people, always smiling. She was talking animatedly with different groups, her eyes bright, her laughter the kind that drew attention. Each time our gazes met, she'd flash me a smile or a playful wink, reminding me of how lucky I was. There was something infectious about her energy that night, something magnetic. I saw her speaking to a few people I didn't recognize, but I thought nothing of it. She was just being her usual charming self, the social butterfly everyone loved. The night wore on, and the alcohol kept flowing. At some point, I stumbled into a conversation with my old college buddies, completely losing track of time. I was aware of how much I'd had to drink, more than I should have, but the buzz had long since taken over. It had been so long since I'd let myself go like this, and I allowed myself to fall fully into the moment. The party seemed endless, a blur of flashing lights, loud music, and blurred faces. I barely noticed the time slipping away. Emily, on the other hand, remained as composed as ever. She was moving around the room, still chatting and laughing with people I couldn't quite place. I watched her for a moment, admiring the way she carried herself, so poised, so confident. I figured she was probably making new friends or catching up with acquaintances, and I was just glad she was having fun. She was so good at fitting in anywhere, while I always seemed to linger on the edges, a little awkward, a little lost without a drink in hand. Eventually, the weight of the alcohol hit me like a sledgehammer, and I knew I had to call it a night. I found Emily, her smile as wide as it had been at the start of the evening. She was in the middle of a conversation with a man I didn't recognize, a tall, well-built guy with sharp features and a charming grin. I waved to her, feeling my legs wobble under me, and she flashed me that familiar smile, one that said she'd join me in a bit. Too drunk to think much of it, I nodded and made my way toward the exit. We both knew how these nights ended. Me crashing hard in a bed while she stayed up a little longer, savoring the party until the very last guest left. It was our routine, and I didn't mind it. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? When we finally got home, I barely made it through the front door before the exhaustion hit me full force. My head was spinning, my body heavy with the weight of too much alcohol. Emily was still in her element, pouring herself a glass of wine and smiling that knowing smile. I muttered something incoherent about going straight to bed, and she kissed me on the cheek, telling me to sleep well. As I collapsed onto the bed, my mind swam in a fog of inebriation, memories of the night flashing in and out of focus. Emily's laughter, the faces of friends I hadn't seen in years, the soft glow of lights dimming in the distance. All of it blurred into one. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness pull me under. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of headache that felt like a jackhammer pounding relentlessly at my skull. My body ached from the alcohol-fueled night before, my muscles sore, and my stomach unsettled. I groaned, rubbing my temples, regretting every shot I had thrown back at the party. I was supposed to be at work in less than an hour, but there was no way I could drag myself out of bed. Not in this state. Emily, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine. She was always better at handling her drinks. I watched her from the bed as she dressed for work, slipping into her favorite blouse, her eyes bright and alert. She looked calm, composed, completely unaffected by last night's chaos. "I'll see you later," she said, giving me a quick peck on the forehead as she grabbed her purse. "Take it easy today, okay? You look like you've been run over by a truck." I grunted in response, too exhausted to muster anything more than a nod. She worked at a small photo studio in town, something she had been excited about for weeks before she finally got the job. It was all she ever talked about, how it was her dream to work in a creative field, doing something she was passionate about. She had only been there 2 weeks, but already she was throwing herself into the role, coming home late, too tired to talk, too busy for much of anything. Still, I was happy for her. She deserved to be doing something she loved. After Emily left, I lay in bed for another 3 hours, drifting in and out of sleep, the headache slowly ebbing away. My mind was hazy, the events of the previous night jumbled in my head. I remembered the party, the drinks, the flashes of laughter, but there was something else too, a lingering sense of unease I couldn't quite shake. Something about that man she had been talking to, the way they had stood so close, almost intimate. But I brushed it off. It was just the alcohol messing with me, making me paranoid. I trusted her. I had to. Finally, boredom got the best of me, and I forced myself out of bed. The house was a mess, and cleaning up seemed like a good way to pass the time while I waited for my head to clear. I spent the next hour picking up stray cups and empty bottles, wiping down surfaces, and straightening up the living room. It was therapeutic in a way, giving me something to focus on other than my pounding headache and the faint, unsettling memories of last night. I was scrubbing the kitchen counter when something caught my eye. The vent cover under the counter was slightly ajar. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been crouching down to wipe the floor. My first thought was that I must have knocked it loose while cleaning, but as I stared at it, a strange sense of curiosity gnawed at me. Why was it open? Without thinking much of it, I knelt down and pulled the cover away from the wall. My hand hesitated for a moment before reaching inside, fingers brushing against something that wasn't supposed to be there. I felt around and grabbed hold of a thick envelope, tugging it out carefully. What I saw made my heart stop. Inside the vent, hidden away in the dark space behind the cover, was a stack of cash, thick, neatly bundled wads of $100 bills, and a pile of A4 papers. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was there so much money stashed away here? What were these papers? I sat down at the kitchen table, pulling the contents out and laying them in front of me. The money was the first thing I counted. $50,000. $50,000. My heart pounded in my chest as the sheer amount sank in. Where had Emily gotten this? How long had it been there? But it wasn't the money that made me feel like the ground was crumbling beneath me. It was the papers. My hands shook as I unfolded them, my eyes scanning the words written across the pages. It was a contract, and as I read it, the blood drained from my face. My wife, Emily, had signed an agreement to appear in pornographic films for a company I'd never heard of. The deal was clear and explicit. She was being paid $120,000 for a month of work, and the $50,000 was an advance payment. The contract detailed everything, the schedule, the dates, the locations. Even worse, it listed exactly what she was supposed to do and who she was supposed to do it with. My stomach turned as I read the revolting details. Every day for the last 2 weeks, she had been with different men, groups of men. Every single day. It was all there, laid out in black and white. She had been lying to me this entire time, going to work at the photo studio while living out some twisted double life. I pushed the papers away from me, disgusted, my mind spinning. My hands gripped the edge of the table, trying to hold on to something, anything that made sense. But nothing did. Everything was unraveling. Emily, the woman I had trusted completely, the woman I had loved and supported. She had been selling herself, lying to my face every day as if it meant nothing. The past few weeks flashed before my eyes. Her late nights, her distant behavior, her reluctance to be intimate with me. It all made sense now. She hadn't wanted me to visit her at the studio, always making excuses, always brushing me off. We hadn't had sex in weeks, and I had just assumed it was stress from her new job. But now I understood. I understood everything. The fury that hit me was like a tidal wave, crashing over me, swallowing me whole. My hands trembled, my breath coming in short. shallow gasps as I struggled to process the enormity of what I had just discovered. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this, in the worst way imaginable? And for money. For money. I wanted to confront her right then and there. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, tear apart every lie she had ever told me. But I didn't. Not yet. I had to be smart about this. I had to think. With shaking hands, I stuffed the money and the contract back into the vent, replacing the cover as if nothing had ever happened. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. Tomorrow, I would confront her. Tomorrow, I would do something she would never see coming. But tonight, I would sit with this knowledge, let the anger build and fester, until I knew exactly what I was going to do. Emily thought she had me fooled, but she had no idea. The next morning, my anger boiled over the moment I woke up. Emily moved around the house like nothing was wrong, acting as if we were still just a normal couple going through the motions of daily life. She kissed me goodbye as she headed off to work, the same way she had every other morning. But today was different. Today I was going to follow her. As soon as she left, I got dressed and grabbed my car keys. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. The plan was simple. Follow her, see where she went, and find out if everything I had read in that contract was really happening. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was going somewhere else. Maybe there was some other explanation. But deep down, I knew what I was going to find. I trailed her car at a distance, making sure she wouldn't notice me. She drove for a while, through familiar streets, her route so casual and routine it was almost painful to watch. Eventually, she pulled up to the same place she had been going every day, the photo studio she had claimed was her dream job. I parked a few blocks away and got out, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her walk through the front door, completely oblivious to the fact that I was right behind her. For a moment, I hesitated. What was I going to do when I found out the truth? Was I ready to face it head on, to confront her with the rage I'd been holding inside since the moment I discovered that contract? I stood there, frozen, watching from across the street as people passed by, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I stayed outside the studio for a while, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to figure out my next move. I watched as several men arrived, each one tall, muscular, and black, just like the ones described in the papers I had found hidden in the vent. They walked inside with a casual confidence, like they had done this 100 times before. I counted 6 of them, maybe more. I wasn't sure. My mind was already unraveling. Half an hour passed and no one else went inside. No clients, no customers, just those men. A sickening feeling twisted in my gut. It was exactly what I had feared. Emily wasn't here to work in some innocent photo studio. She was here for them, for that contract. The fury that had been building up inside me exploded. Without thinking, I crossed the street and pushed through the door of the studio, my blood boiling with rage. The dim light of the hallway greeted me as I walked deeper into the building, my footsteps heavy with purpose. The walls were plastered with framed photos of smiling families and happy couples, mocking me with their innocence, their fake perfection. But the deeper I went, the darker it felt. There was something sinister in the air, something I could feel crawling under my skin. Then I heard it, Emily's voice. She was moaning, loudly, shamelessly. Her voice echoed through the narrow hallway, punctuated by sharp, breathless cries of pleasure. Yes, harder, keep F asterisk, 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 me. My heart stopped. I could barely breathe as I stood frozen just outside the room. The sound of her voice, so raw and animalistic, sent a wave of nausea through me. I couldn't think straight anymore. All I knew was that I had to stop this. I had to stop her. I kicked the door open, my eyes wild with rage, and the scene in front of me felt like a punch to the gut. There she was, my wife, Emily, naked, on her hands and knees, surrounded by several black men, all of them taking turns with her like she was nothing more than a toy to be passed around. Her eyes went wide when she saw me, her body freezing mid-motion, but she didn't say a word. She didn't try to explain, didn't try to cover herself. She just stared at me, her face pale with shock, her body trembling. I saw red. I didn't think. I just acted. There was a chair near the entrance. and before I even realized what I was doing, I grabbed it and hurled it at one of the men standing closest to her. He dodged it easily, the chair crashing against the wall behind him, but I didn't care. I was already moving toward them, fists clenched, ready to tear them apart. Emily's shocked silence only fueled my rage. Her betrayal so clear, so vile. "What the hell is this?" I roared, my voice cracking with the intensity of my anger. I could barely hear myself over the rush of blood in my ears, over the pounding of my own heart. "How could you do this to me? How could you?" Before I could get any closer, two of the men stepped in front of me. They were massive, towering over me with easy confidence, their faces calm, almost amused. One of them grabbed me by the arm, yanking me back with more strength than I could fight against. I tried to swing at him, my fist connecting weakly with his side, but it was like hitting a brick wall. My rage was nothing compared to their size and strength. "Get the F*** off me!" I screamed, my voice hoarse, desperate. I could still hear Emily behind them, her breathing heavy, her eyes glued to me, wide with disbelief. I tried to break free, thrashing wildly, but before I knew it, two more men had grabbed hold of me. Their hands were like iron, and no matter how hard I struggled, they barely flinched. They started dragging me backward, pulling me out of the room, out of the studio. I could still see Emily, still see the blank, stunned look on her face as I shouted at her, trying to make sense of the chaos. "Why?" I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. "Why are you doing this? Why, Emily?" But she didn't answer. She just sat there, motionless, her face pale and unreadable, like she couldn't even recognize me anymore. The men shoved me through the front door of the studio, their grip still tight, as they pushed me onto the sidewalk. I stumbled, nearly falling to my knees, but I caught myself just in time. One of them leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. "If you come back here again," he hissed, "it'll be worse for you. Don't ing test us." And then they were gone. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving me standing there alone in the middle of the street, my entire world crumbling around me. I could still hear the echo of Emily's voice in my ears, still see the look on her face, and it made my blood run cold. I had come here to find the truth, and now that I had, it felt like I had been torn apart from the inside. Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our life, had been shattered in an instant. I stood there, numb, my hands shaking, as the weight of her betrayal settled deep in my bones. She had chosen them. She had chosen this. And now, there was no going back. I stood outside the studio, pounding on the door so hard my fists ached. Each hit sent a wave of frustration and helplessness coursing through me, but no one answered. No one came out. I screamed Emily's name into the silence, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. But it was as if the world had swallowed my cries. She was still inside, with them, and the thought alone was enough to make me sick. When no one responded, I slumped against the door, my forehead pressed against the cool metal. I wanted to storm back in there, confront her again, demand answers, but my body was too weak, my mind too scattered. I couldn't think straight. Everything was a blur of confusion, anger, and betrayal, and my entire world felt like it was unraveling at the seams. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to pull myself together, but then I saw them. Two men, the same men from earlier. Muscular, imposing, the kind of men you wouldn't want to cross on any normal day. Their eyes locked onto me as they stepped out of the building, and for a second, I could tell they were looking for me. They didn't even try to hide it. My heart began to race. Panic surged through me. I knew exactly what was about to happen. These weren't men looking for a conversation. They were here to finish what had been started. I backed away slowly, but it was too late. They saw me. "Hey," one of them shouted, his voice rough, angry. "What the hell were you doing in there?" I didn't wait for them to get closer. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. My legs moved on instinct, driven by nothing but the overwhelming need to escape. The streets blurred around me as I sprinted down alleyways, my breath coming in short, painful bursts. Every step echoed in my ears, the sound of their footsteps chasing me. I knew they were faster. I knew they were stronger. If they caught me, I was done for. I weaved between narrow streets, hoping to lose them in the maze of buildings. But my body was betraying me. The pain in my chest grew sharper with each breath, and my legs felt like lead. I couldn't keep this up. I glanced over my shoulder, my heart pounding in my throat. They were getting closer, their faces twisted with anger, and I knew I had nowhere to go. I rounded a corner, only to find myself trapped in a dead-end alley. The walls loomed high around me, the exit now blocked by the two men who had closed in behind me. I was cornered, and there was no way out. My back pressed against the brick wall, and my mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. But there was nothing. No one. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked me up and down, disgust etched into his features. "What the hell were you doing there?" he snarled. Before I could respond, he lunged at me. His fist connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I doubled over, gasping for breath, but they didn't stop. The other man grabbed me by the shoulders, shoving me to the ground. I hit the pavement hard, my body aching with every impact. They didn't give me a chance to defend myself. "Answer me, you piece of S*******. One of them shouted, kicking me hard in the ribs. Pain shot through my side, and I tried to curl into myself, shielding my body from the blows, but it was no use. They kept coming, kick after kick, their voices growing louder, more furious. I screamed for help, my voice weak and desperate, but the alley was empty. There was no one around, no one to hear me. The city carried on without noticing the violence unfolding in this forgotten corner of the world. And no one cared. One of the men kicked me in the face, and my vision went white. The pain was blinding, my head spinning, and before I knew it, darkness crept in from the edges of my mind. My body went limp, my limbs useless against the onslaught. I tried to fight it, but everything went numb. I could feel myself slipping, my consciousness fading, and the last thing I heard before I blacked out was one of them spitting on the ground next to me. "If you come back here again," one of them growled, his voice distorted through the haze of pain, "it'll be worse for you." And then nothing. I don't know how long I was out. Hours, maybe. When I woke up, the sky had darkened, and the city lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the alleyway. My whole body throbbed with pain. I struggled to sit up, my hand trembling as I touched the side of my face. Blood. My lip was split, and my ribs felt like they were on fire. Every breath hurt, but I was alive. Somehow, I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. I had to get home. I didn't know how, but I had to. By the time I stumbled through the front door, it was late, and I was in worse shape than I realized. My clothes were torn, blood smeared across my face, and I could barely walk without wincing. But the moment I stepped inside, I saw her, Emily, sitting on the couch, crying. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was sorry. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Don't yell. Please, just let me explain." But I couldn't control it. The rage that had been simmering inside me for so long exploded. My fists clenched, and I slammed the door behind me so hard it shook the walls. "Explain?" I shouted, my voice raw. "Explain what, Emily? How you betrayed me. How you been ing strangers behind my back." I stormed through the living room, grabbing the nearest object, our TV, the one we had bought together just a few months ago, and hurled it across the room. It shattered into pieces, glass spraying across the floor. But I didn't care. I wanted to break everything. I wanted to tear our life apart, just like she had torn mine. Emily stood up, still crying, but she didn't move toward me. She didn't try to stop me. She just watched in shock as I destroyed everything in my path. "Why, Emily?" I screamed, ripping a lamp off the table and throwing it to the ground. "Why did you do this? What the hell were you thinking?" And then something changed. Her sobs stopped, her tears still wet on her cheeks, but her expression hardened. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she was defending herself. "Do you want to know why?" she shouted back, her voice rising to match mine. Because I wanted to be independent. Because I didn't want to rely on you for everything. I froze, my mind reeling from her words. Independent? What the hell was she talking about? I didn't want to ask you for money anymore, she continued, her voice full of anger, her tears forgotten. I wanted to do something for myself. This is my life. I wanted this. I wanted control. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. My chest tightened, and I struggled to process what she was saying. And this, she spat, gesturing around her, this is my dream. I always wanted to be a model, and this job gave me that chance. I don't care if you don't understand. I stood there, frozen, staring at the woman I thought I knew. Her dream? This was her dream? To betray me? To sleep with strangers for money? The realization settled in, cold and final. I can't take this anymore, I muttered, my voice barely audible as the rage dissolved into exhaustion. Get out, Emily. I don't want to see you anymore. Her face twisted, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her things, her jaw tight, and without another word, she left. The door slammed behind her, echoing through the empty house, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our life. The next day, I woke up broken. The first thing I noticed was the emptiness, the kind that gnaws at your insides and leaves you hollow. My head throbbed from the alcohol I'd drowned myself in the night before, and the taste of stale whiskey lingered in my mouth. The house was silent, but not the kind of peaceful quiet you'd welcome after a long day. No, this was the kind of silence that suffocates, wraps itself around you, and reminds you of everything you've lost. I'd been drinking all night, trying to blur out the memories, trying to numb the pain, but no matter how much alcohol I poured into myself, it wasn't enough to make me forget what Emily had done, what my wife had become. It wasn't enough to erase the image of her with those men, her voice echoing in my ears, her betrayal carved into my soul. I didn't even know what to do anymore. I was lost, spiraling in a world where everything I thought I knew had been torn apart. She was gone. She hadn't even taken her things when she stormed out last night. The only reminder of her departure was the photo of us that had fallen when she slammed the door. Our wedding photo, now cracked, the frame shattered on the floor. I'd thought that after everything, I could never forgive her. But then I heard a knock. It started soft at first, just a tap on the door, but quickly turned into loud banging. I sat there, staring at the empty bottles around me, the room hazy with smoke from my cigarette. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to face her. But her voice came through the wood, desperate, shouting my name, begging me to let her in. Open the door. I just want to get my things. I crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, watching the smoke curl into the air. Her voice was frantic, pleading, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I didn't want to see her face, didn't want to look into her eyes and remember the woman I once loved, the woman who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. So I stayed inside, drinking, smoking, letting her words bounce off the walls until they faded into the night. The hours dragged by, and I thought it was over, thought I'd finally have some peace. But just as I was about to collapse in a bed, another knock came, this time louder, more insistent. My heart raced. Something was wrong. I stumbled to the door, still half drunk, my body heavy with exhaustion and pain. When I swung it open, what I saw made my blood run cold. There they were, the same two men who had beaten me in the alley. And standing between them was Emily. My heart dropped into my stomach. Panic gripped me, and I backed away, shouting before they could say a word. You came to beat me again, didn't you? My voice cracked with fear. One of the men, the larger of the two, smirked, but Emily stepped forward, her eyes filled with something close to desperation. No, they won't touch you, she said quickly. I told them not to. Just let me in, please. I need to get my things. I didn't want to let her in. Every fiber of my being screamed to slam the door in her face. But the sight of those two men behind her, towering, waiting, forced my hand. I didn't want to be beaten again. Not like before. So, reluctantly, I stepped aside. Emily walked in, her eyes scanning the mess of empty bottles, the broken picture frame on the floor. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, taking it all in. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Let's start over with a clean slate." I stared at her, incredulous. My body trembled, my fists clenching at my sides. A clean slate? How could she even say those words after everything she had done? After what I had witnessed? After what she had become? The anger that I had tried so hard to bury surged back to the surface, burning through me like wildfire. "I don't want to see you," I spat, my voice shaking with fury. "I can't even look at you, let alone touch you. Not after what you did with those men." Her face tightened, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, as if she had expected this. She packed her things quickly, silently, without any more pleas or explanations. I didn't stop her. I didn't say another word. And when she finally left, slamming the door behind her for the last time, I collapsed into the chair, feeling more alone than I ever had in my entire life. It's been over a week since then, and I haven't left the house once. This place, which once felt like home, has turned into a haven for drunks. Every night, I've had strangers over. People who drink until they can't stand. People who don't care about anything other than drowning out their own misery. I became one of them, partying until the sun came up, the sound of laughter and music a weak mask for the pain that gnawed at me. We drank to forget, to numb the wounds that wouldn't heal. The police came more than once, pounding on my door because of the noise complaints. I didn't care. When they told me to quiet down, I laughed in their faces. They offered to help, suggested I talk to someone, but I waved them off. Help? What could help? Nothing could heal the wound Emily had left behind. Nothing except alcohol. Days blurred into weeks. The parties became more frequent, the crowds louder, more chaotic. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I had lost everything that had once made sense in my life. The house that Emily and I had built together was now falling apart, just like me. I had no friends left. Even the drunks stopped coming after a while. There was no more alcohol, no more life left to drain from me. I was alone. A month passed, and I was barely a shadow of the man I had once been. I hadn't showered in days, hadn't eaten anything that wasn't soaked in whiskey. My money ran out. I lost track of time, lost track of everything. The house was a wreck, and I had stopped caring. There were no more parties, no more distractions. Even the homeless people who had once partied with me were gone. I had nothing left to give them. I was homeless in my own home, broken, empty. I spent my days wandering from room to room, my mind consumed by the endless loop of memories. Emily's betrayal, her face twisted in those moments of selfish defense, her voice screaming that she wanted to be independent. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape her. The wound she left wasn't just deep. It was infinite, a chasm I couldn't climb out of. I couldn't even cry anymore. The tears had dried up long ago, replaced by this cold, hollow ache that never left me. I had hit rock bottom, and there was no coming back. All I had now was the bottle. And even that wasn't enough. This wasn't living. This was something far worse. This was hell. And I was stuck here, sinking deeper into it. One morning, I woke up to an unfamiliar sensation, clarity. My head wasn't pounding, my body wasn't heavy with alcohol. And for the first time in weeks, I could think clearly. I stared at the ceiling, the early morning light filtering through the cracks in the blinds. And for a brief moment, I felt like myself again. Sober. But that fleeting sense of normalcy was quickly replaced by a sickening realization. I couldn't keep living like this. If I did, I knew exactly where I'd end up. Dead, either from drinking myself into oblivion or from letting this anger consume me. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. I needed a change, needed to crawl out of the pit I had dug for myself before it was too late. I pushed myself out of bed, my legs weak and unsteady. The house was in complete disarray, a reflection of the chaos in my mind. Broken bottles littered the floor, half-burnt cigarettes scattered across every surface. The walls, once filled with photos of happier times, now felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with their emptiness. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a tomb, and I couldn't stay buried in it. I needed to clean up, not just the house, but myself. As I started picking up the wreckage, tossing out the remnants of countless nights wasted, something clicked in my mind. The vent. The money. It should still be there, hidden in the same place I'd found it weeks ago. I hadn't touched it since, hadn't thought about it during my descent into despair. Maybe Emily had forgotten about it, too. Maybe she had been in such a rush to escape that night that she hadn't even bothered to take what she had hidden away. I knelt down by the vent, prying it open with shaking hands, my heart pounding in my chest. And there was the envelope untouched, $50,000 in cash, just as I had left it. For a moment, I could barely breathe. This money, it was more than just a stash. It was a second chance. I counted the bills, my mind spinning with possibilities. This wasn't just money. It was freedom, a way out of this nightmare, a way to start over. But I knew if I stayed in this house, surrounded by memories of Emily and everything I had lost, I'd end up right back where I started, drinking myself to death. I couldn't let that happen. I decided right then and there that I was going to take the money to the bank, put it away where it couldn't tempt me, where it could become the foundation for a new life. A life without Emily, without the past haunting me at every turn. As I walked to the bank, the fresh air cleared my mind further. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I could see a future again, a life where I wasn't drowning in anger and regret. But then, just as I turned the corner onto the main street, I saw her. Emily. She was walking on the other side of the street, her face turned away from me, but there was no mistaking her. My heart lurched in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since she had left with those men, not since our last explosive fight. But now something was different. As she walked, I saw it, a small, unmistakable bump beneath her dress. She was pregnant. I felt a jolt of panic, my thoughts spinning wildly. Was it mine? Could it be? Without thinking, I ran toward her, shouting her name. She turned, her eyes widening in shock when she saw me. I must have looked like a ghost, disheveled, gaunt, like a man who had been through hell and barely made it out. She stared at me for a moment, frozen, before I closed the distance between us. Emily, I shouted, breathless. Is it mine? Is that? Are you pregnant? She flinched, her hands instinctively moving to cover her belly. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp, defensive. Why do you look like this? I've been through hell, I snapped, unable to control the anger bubbling up inside me. But that's not important. Just answer me, is it mine? Is that my child? Emily looked away, biting her lip, refusing to meet my gaze. I could feel my heart pounding, the desperation building with each second she stayed silent. Answer me, I demanded, my voice shaking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Fear? Yes, she whispered. It's yours. For a moment, the world stopped. Everything around me blurred, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. It's mine. The words echoed in my head, and for a brief, fleeting second, I felt a rush of joy. I was going to be a father. I had a future, something to fight for, something to rebuild my life around. But then, just as quickly, she ripped it away from me. But you'll never see this child, she said, her voice cold, the words cutting through me like a knife. Look at yourself. You're homeless. You're a wreck. I'm not giving this baby to you. Not when you can barely take care of yourself. The joy evaporated, replaced by a crushing weight of helplessness. Emily, please, I begged. I'm changing. I'm sober now. I can take care of you, of the baby. Please, just let me. But she shook her head, her face hardening. No, you can't. You're not fit to be a father, not like this. I could feel the rage bubbling up again, the same rage that had consumed me so many times before. This is my child, I shouted, my fists clenching at my sides. You don't get to take that away from me. We shouted at each other, our voices echoing down the street, but in the end, nothing changed. Emily turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, hollow, broken all over again. I wanted to chase after her, to grab her, to make her see that I wasn't the same man I had been. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. She was gone, and now, so was the future I thought I had. I stood there for a long time, staring after her until she disappeared around the corner. And when I finally turned to walk back home, it wasn't with hope. It was with the crushing realization that I had lost everything. A month passed after that day, and with each passing day, the weight of it all grew heavier. The house, our house, felt like a cage, a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't stay here anymore. There was nothing left for me here. No friends, no family, no future. Emily had taken that with her when she walked away, and now I was just existing. Barely. One morning, I made the decision. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep living in the ruins of my past. So I put the house up for sale, packed whatever little I had left, and decided to leave. To move somewhere, anywhere, that didn't remind me of her. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I didn't belong here anymore. Not in this house. Not in this